explain why I'm going to be running around like a headless chicken in my sparkly trainers with this thing towards the end of our session. You're not here to talk to me, you are here, or listen to me rather, you are here to listen to my two fantastic speakers this morning. I'm going to introduce you to Catherine and to Graham, who are going to talk to you about agile learning. Catherine, Graham, over to you.
Thanks very much. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our session today. So we're going to do this, I'm going to talk first and then I'm going to pass over to Graham. A little bit about me. I lead our knowledge management team at Thames Water. I've been there for not quite 3 years, and prior to that I worked for Vodafone for 10 years here in the UK as part of their legal team, and prior to that worked in Australia in a number of different organisations. My background is knowledge and information management, and that is essentially about making things easy for people and making sure that people have got the right information and the right knowledge at their fingertips at the right time. And we can talk about how that complements learning. We've had a knowledge team at Thames for the last 3 years. Initially, we were set up to support our contact centres, to make sure that our contact centre agents have got the right information to support our customer interaction. But recently we've restructured, and I'll talk through that a little bit, so that we're now part of a broader learning and development function and HR function with a broader remit, and we're looking more widely at how we can apply knowledge management across our business. Thames, a lot of you are probably customers of Thames. We're the largest water and wastewater services provider in the UK. We service approximately 15 million people, including London, and we have about 6,000 employees. So I'm going to take you through my view of Agile, and then Graham as well. And you'll see some common themes, but we're also approaching things from slightly different angles. Okay, the clicker works, that's good. Okay, so what does Agile mean to me? So I'm not an Agile practitioner. Graham will talk to you more about methodologies and the more specifics. But to me, Agile means understanding the problem and honing in on that problem, engaging with people, and then being really responsive and targeted and relevant with what you provide in terms of a solution, and doing that with impact. So my job is about making core information, know-how, and know-who easy to find, and that's essentially making it easy and having the right tools for the job. Now that can be with our contact centre, so our agents have the right information at their fingertips to support those customer interactions, and we start to drive some consistency. But we're also, now that we have a broader remit, looking at how can we apply those principles to our waste and water sites, and also look at our other teams, our operational teams around our business. So the sorts of things we're starting to do are to map knowledge. So what do we already have? Where does it live? What do people know? Who are those people? And make that accessible and visible so that there's that consistency across who knows what. Maximising our assets and what we know. So we know lots of stuff, but we don't really know what we know. And I think there's probably some common themes around that in the room. We have got lots of collective expertise. We've got lots of tenured staff of 30, 40, 45 years experience. And it's about how do we tap into that tacit knowledge. Knowledge can be captured. We talk about explicit knowledge, what's written down, what's in a process manual, what's in a knowledge base, what's in operating procedures, those sorts of things. But more often than not, it's about connecting people and the communities, the networks, joining up the dots of who are the experts and how do I tap into them. And that's the stuff that's really powerful. And what my team try and do is try and think about how do they join those dots between those different teams. We've recently repatriated our science and engineering capabilities, and we're trying to build stronger capabilities in those areas. And we also do things very differently according to different sites. So we might have 350 different wastewater sites, and everyone does something a little bit differently. So we're looking at how can we start to look at what are the common threads across those areas, what are the common themes, and how can we standardise ways of working, and how can we make those ways of working visible to people so that we've got that consistency, and we can react more proactively to both customer and operational needs. Flexibility, resilience and innovation, these are kind of byproducts of doing this well. So sharing knowledge and having access to the right know-how is really essential to us being able to respond as a business. And getting people together and connecting people helps spread ideas, it helps spread innovation, and it builds our resilience in those times where we really need to just get in there and all work together. A big focus for our L&D and HR function at the moment is making sure we've got the right skills and the right capabilities in place now and for the future. And that means we're acting now to make sure that we look at where we're going and what we need and how do we get there. We're looking at and starting to build communities of practice, which are essentially networks of people in similar roles but might be cross-functional or cross-geography. And there's some really innovative, there's real benefits in terms of driving innovation by bringing the right minds together and having that kind of brains trust in the room to either share best practice and implement that more widely or solve collective problems. Working collaboratively and joining the dots. I think this is something we all do, whether we're in learning or any other discipline, but I regularly describe my team as a dating agency because we do tend to join the dots. We join people together and say, do you know this person's also doing this? You need to go and talk to them. Which sounds really simplistic, but actually there's huge power in that human connection. Within our sort of spot within the organisation, we have the luxury of that helicopter view, so we can see where different things are happening, and part of our role is to help facilitate that collaboration. We also use our HR network, so we have learning and development consultants out in the business, we have HR business partners out in the business who can then come back to the centre, and we use those teams to increase our scale and scope, given that we've got quite a small team. We try and instill the principles of learning before, during and after. So you don't reinvent, you reflect as you go, and then you share post and share those lessons learned. Okay, I'm going to talk about how we do, for want of a better word, agile, or what do we do to be agile. So I'm going to take you through 3 key themes. One is around understanding insight and how we use that insight, how we engage with people, so making sure that we're doing things collectively, and then speed to impact or responsiveness. Okay, first of all, insights. A big piece is around maximising our new organisational structure and our place within that, and we can better leverage those connections. So being part of a central learning and development and HR team, whereas previously, so 6 months ago, we had 4 quite disparate operating units across Thames, and essentially we were like 4 separate organisations. We didn't talk to each other, we were quite self-contained, and there were lots of silos. So there's still silos in place. I can't say that it's all beautiful and fabulous, but having the ability that we've got this web of people that we can draw upon who are still baked into the business but come back into a centre where we've got centres of excellence that we're starting to build is hugely beneficial. We can now draw upon a bigger and better talent team. We've got a management development team, we've got career development. We can now tap into that expertise and use that to broaden the kinds of service offerings that we as a function can provide. And that's been a huge plus. The second point is around alignment to strategic priorities. And I don't think I'm telling anyone in the room anything that they don't already know in that respect, but it's fundamental to continually look at what are your key strategic drivers, your key strategic priorities, and reflect on those and understand why are we doing what we're doing. They need to always come back to those priorities. And for that is really about driving value, but it also helps with prioritisation, because if there's stuff that you're doing that doesn't relate to those priorities, you really need to question why are you doing them. So for Thames, we've got 5 strategic priorities: customer service and engagement, a collaborative and capable team, environmental resilience and environmental management, a reliable and resilient service and assets, and we're data and insight led. And everything we do, we try and tie back to those 5 things. You get better buy-in, you add more value, and you can focus on those vital few. I think it's really important to understand what are the big problems that your business are facing, your executives are facing, your senior leaders and the people on the ground, and then try and understand where you can add the most value. And I think it's important that you don't do that in terms of L&D speak or knowledge management speak, but you think about the business problems and then work backwards. I'm going to talk more about engagement shortly, but we really try and listen to our people, and that's around consulting skills, listening skills, understanding the problems. So rather than going in top heavy and we've got a solution, here it is, really understanding those nuances and talking to people at all different levels rather than just jumping to solution mode. And I think being agile is around thinking, how can we do this differently? How can we do things in a better way? How can we be more creative rather than just following the kind of the script? What does our data tell us? Well, data, I'm Australian, so I'll use the Aussie term. So Thames as a business is very focused on being data-led, and we talk about data, information, insight, and action, and making sure that our actions and our decisions are based on data so that to inform what we're doing. So as a knowledge management team, as a learning and development function, as an HR function, we've got lots of stuff we can draw upon. We have a knowledge base so we can see what are people looking at, what are they not looking at, what are they searching for but not finding, who's using it, and use those patterns and that insight to help target our responses. We use quiz software as really quick deployment sort of knowledge testing, but it also is really engaging. A couple of my team were up in Rotherham earlier this week with one of our third-party providers using quiz software to test knowledge and then use our knowledge base as a means of helping to build that knowledge and fill in those gaps. We look at what our contact centre drivers are. Why do people call us? What do we get right? What do we not get right? What drives our complaints? What drives those repeat call drivers? So all of that insight gives us a really good map of what's going on. We also tie into things like our talent mapping. So where have we got critical people? Where have we got critical roles? And how do we focus on that really critical knowledge in terms of prioritising where we need to spend our efforts? Visibility, I think this is about being part of the process and part of the solution and really shouldering in, communicating, being visible, telling people what you're doing, bringing stories to life and using all of the available opportunities and channels that you've got to do that. One of the things we've done is help bring to life the day in the life of different parts of the business. And in any organisation of a reasonable size with disparate sites, a lot of people don't know what goes on in other parts of the organisation. So we try and bring those elements to life, either using experts or video or just breaking down those barriers, and you have those aha moments where people realise, okay, if I don't do this, this is how it impacts this piece over here and ultimately our customers. So we try and join those dots. Engagement. So people. It's all about talking to people. One of our biggest challenges is keeping up with continual change in an operational environment. So last year we had the Beast from the East, about this time last year. Then we had the longest, hottest, driest summer in history, or in about 25 years, I think. We've had an increasingly dry winter as well. So we have lots of operational challenges in terms of supply, demand, and keeping our service running and our assets running. And Thames is investing a lot in its network and its resilience. It wants to be digital first. We're building lots of new capability. We're putting in a new billing system. All of these things means there's lots and lots of change. And for us to keep up with that and make sure that our knowledge management offerings, our L&D offerings keep pace, we really have to be plugged in. Now that can be quite exhausting, and it means a continual sort of round of checking in, but we're building those relationships and we invest a lot in those relationships. And if you have those relationships, those people can then be your advocates to help spread the word, so it's not just you doing stuff, it starts to embed in that culture. Facilitating connections and communities. We work a lot with our subject matter experts. So we help facilitate, we help provide tools, we help provide solutions and enablers, but we've got people in our business who really know our business and they know it, deeply. We work with those people and build those relationships so that they can help validate what we're doing. So it's co-creation. They validate our content. Are we doing the right things? We don't just make it up. We're using insight from our people, insight from our data to make sure that we deliver what's needed. And I think it also, that spreads accountability as well. So it's not just the learning teams or the knowledge teams who are doing stuff. It starts to be a joint effort, and that spreads across the organisation. I think in terms of challenges of time, and it's another thing to do, to really focus on the value and the what's in it for me element. And really looking at how, with a bit of input now and investment now, how we can start to support people to reduce reliance on individuals' knowledge, that we can document some of that information, that we can take away some of those pain points. So working together to hopefully get to a joint beneficial outcome. What's the problem? Quick wins and demonstrating value. Again, that's about listening to people, understanding their role, what are their challenges, how do we make things easier? And a lot of this comes back to, in an L&D world, about being learner-led, so that we're not doing things in a darkened room and then imposing and doing things to people. It works the same way with knowledge. So we do a lot of focus groups. What's working, what's not working, what would you like to see, what are your biggest challenges, how can we work with you to help alleviate those? We try and use times where we've got a captive audience. So we do morning huddles, for instance, and all of the operational teams will do huddles so we can get into the huddles. Lunch and learns, free food is always a good, even just cake. Cake makes people happy. We make sure we've got visibility if we've got conferences, if there's team meetings. In our contact centre, we've introduced what we've called a knowledge tree, which is just a big magnetic tree that sits on a wall, which is also a whiteboard where people can brainstorm and do those sorts of things. And it's based on the concept of giving and taking, that everyone's got something to give and everyone's got something to learn. So people can post questions or areas of knowledge gaps, and then there'll always be someone else in the team or outside of the team who can help support in that space. We theme it, so it might be based on particular issues that we're having, particular call drivers, but we're trying to then use it's a practical way of capturing that, and we do something similar with Yammer, with our technicians who are on solo sites. Quite often they don't get to meet their counterparts so often. So we try and use technology, but we also try and use practical stuff as well to bring all those pieces together. We try and bake knowledge principles into existing processes. So we don't want to be another process, another thing to do. So wherever possible, we try and bring ourselves into existing frameworks and existing ways of working. Examples of how we've doing that is that we're reassessing our behavioural competencies at Thames. There's a whole piece of work around the way we work. So we're making sure that we've got a common language and that we're baking knowledge sharing and knowledge transfer principles into some of those frameworks. Sharing knowledge, you always hit the challenge of knowledge is power and it's mine, and I'm special because I know lots of stuff, and we have lots of people who are hugely valuable with the amount of know-how that they have, but there's also real value in sharing that, and there's a legacy to be maintained. One thing we're trying to do in that space at the moment is we're trialling a rundown to retirement program, which is in alignment with our engagement and diversity team. And we're putting in place a knowledge transfer piece as part of that, with a few people who've got 40 plus years experience in very specific roles, and working with them to understand how do they do things, who do they talk to, what would they have most wanted 20 years ago, how can they best help our pipelines of graduates, apprentices and other talent coming in, how can we partner, and so they can really leave a legacy within the business and see the benefits of sharing that. Courage and tenacity, I think we all need that. That's a day-to-day piece, but getting senior stakeholders on board can make your life an awful lot easier. But don't give up, because I think that there's an element of we talk about Thames treacle. It can be really difficult to get stuff done and get to the right people, but I think if you can, and even have your elevator pitch really honed and grab people even just for 5 or 10 minutes and sell them that piece, that how you're going to help make their lives or their team or hit a strategic goal more quickly, more easily, you can start to open doors. We put in place a learning management system last year within our customer experience function. There were challenges in sort of getting this through as more than just a technology solution. It was much more than that. And I cornered our CX director for one lunchtime when I knew she was in the building. I knew she had a lunch break. Took my laptop down there and said, this is what we're going to do. And she was an instant advocate. And she then starts to open the doors. So I think use people in the best way that you can. The other piece that we're trying to do is build the understanding of what goes before and what goes after my role in an organisation. The piece that I do, what happens if I don't do this correctly or don't do things in the best way that I can, and trying to bridge that understanding and bridge those gaps. Keeping things simple, giving people one place to go that's up to date, that's trusted, and help them by doing the hard work for them, do the curating, do the filtering, do the bringing together. And then finally, speed to impact. Agility for me isn't about cutting corners for the sake of speed. It's about being responsive to a need and being targeted. And I think this brings into play the piece around insight as well as engagement and bringing all of that together. So it's focusing on the business problem versus just going to solution, but melding your solution around that problem and really thinking about what tools and techniques have we got broadly available that could help, whether that's communication, whether it's bringing people together, is it a knowledge base, is it a knowledge map, and really talking to people about what's working and what's not. People want to find stuff really easily when they need it, just in time. So this is all about being bite-sized. So our knowledge base for our customer experience function helps them as they go through training. It helps them as they increase their speed to competency, and it's then a ready reference when they need it, when they're on a phone with a customer, on a web chat, on an email, and they can go to something really quickly. They don't have half an hour to read or view something. They need it then and there in the moment. So we use a combination of bite-sized nuggets of knowledge. We use video, we use imagery, we use pictures, and all of that is gained from talking to people around the organisation. There's one place that they can go. Focus on the outcomes and the basics. I think this is, again, about working backwards from the goal. I was at our leadership conference yesterday in Newbury, which was all about how do we achieve what we need to achieve as a business, and I think it's really important that you keep that front of mind and work backwards. But start with the foundation pieces. And as a business, we're doing a lot to build competency frameworks, to put better technology in place. So lots of foundation work that we can then build upon and do more exciting stuff. Really maximise what you have. Making life easier. So I think this is a combination of using both people, process, and technology. It's maximising what's already in place. So we use Yammer, we use Skype, we use our Microsoft suite, but we also have a learning management system, a knowledge management system as well, and we try and maximise as much as we have. Building capability and confidence. So knowledge really complements learning in terms of helping to build capabilities, spread capability, build connections, bring the right people together, and it's more informal learning, it's about social learning. We're undergoing a period of intense transformation and change, but we're really thinking much more across our holistic HR function as to what do we want people to think, feel and do, and what are the different elements that come into play. So to me, Agile is about being adaptable, it's about being flexible, it's about being in tune with what's going on out there, but holding your nerve as well and knowing that you can be the expert and you're the professional in delivering certain solutions, and to do that in a creative way. What you do doesn't have to be gold-plated. People want something, so it's better to get something out there and be iterative and have that co-development and co-creation to get people excited, get them interested, and let them help shape things. I think there's a huge opportunity for learning and development, for knowledge management practitioners to really help navigate through what is a very complex world out there, and to help us all enable, facilitate and inspire people. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. It was interesting to see how an organisation is lining up and looking at Agile as that wider context. What I'd like to do this morning is to run through our experiences at BP. So I'm head up a design team at BP, one of the 6 academies that sit within BP. One thing, like Catherine, we're going to touch on is the idea of engagement, visibility, and speed of impact. And I think what I want to do is talk through some of the challenges we had on how we brought a concept like Agile into the organisation, how we dealt with stakeholders right across the board, whether that was third party, whether it was people in the organisation and decision makers in the organisation. I'm going to touch a little bit on how Agile works and some of the key concepts, but I'm not going to get too much into that, but just to whet your appetite of what that might mean if it's something that you want to look at. As I say, BP has 6 academies. We're the OMS Academy, which is based around safety, compliance and reliability. So we work with the operations part of the BP organisation. So right across the organisation, everything from chemical plants, oil rigs, to refineries, etc. So a lot of our training is around risk management, process safety, but we do elements around human performance, cyber security, etc. 3 years ago, we started a journey where we were moving from traditional face-to-face over to a more digital learning solution. And with that came challenges. And I think we've been going through a journey over the last 3 years to develop the challenges and understand challenges from management, but also challenges from the learner. And I think one of the things we realized quite quickly was actually the learner maybe doesn't want to go this way, because when we ask them what they want, it's the faster horses scenario that actually they tell us what they've always had because it's what they know. So there was an element of educating the learner on this. We did have some support, and I think we had some external influences. So a successful environment is a very difficult environment to change because there's all risks associated with this. So the economy assisted us in that a little bit, but also the drop in the oil price gave us a window of opportunity to start to change how we delivered learning. And the pressures on our business, were to start to look at how we could do that differently. So as I say, we're made up of 6 academies. We sit in one of those academies, and a nice little picture of our first Agile project there and getting people together. And for those of you with shrewder eyes will realise that some of those people weren't even in the room. So it's the wonders of modern technology that we can get a picture with those people on. But it was an operation, it was a project that involved people across the globe. So as I say, our understanding, our trial was to take learning and digital learning from the secondary way of learning, which is what it had been in BP for a long time, to a primary way of learning. And it was understanding the drivers and understanding the advocates in the business. Who were people willing to take this on and trial it? And that was a lot of working with our SMEs in the organisation to take them from a place where they traditionally were happy to sit down in their classroom to how we could deliver this digitally. And that was a journey we took them on. And it was a journey we went through that it's developed and it's grown. And as those people have become more confident, we've got a lot more advocates in the business now. So it's about challenges. And one of the things I'm going to talk a little bit about is the challenges we came up across. But one I also want to talk about is the outcomes, what we got from it. So I think in our experience, we got so much from this, and it wasn't necessarily what we expected. It wasn't when we expected it to be faster. There was a lot more to it than that, and I'll go into that in a little bit more depth. So, understanding our journey. As I say, we started this 3 years ago, and we are a very ops-orientated and engineering organisation. So we used waterfall, and we'd used waterfall for years, and we used waterfall when we do oil rigs, we use waterfall when we're in chemical plants, etc. So the question was waterfall working for us? And we put the more process in place based around waterfall. And I think an easy thing to do now is look back and say, that was the wrong thing to do for a design process. Well, actually, I don't think it was. What waterfall allowed us to do and what putting structure in allowed us to do was buy us credibility. It bought us a bit of confidence in what we did. For the SMEs that we're working with, we were talking their language. It was language that they understood. But it started us on a journey. And I think as we built more credibility, as they had confidence in what we were developing, it allowed us that bit more flexibility. I think if we'd have tried something like Agile 3 years ago, we wouldn't have got the support. So was it the wrong thing? It definitely wasn't right for us designing learning offers, but it took us on that journey of bringing our stakeholders on board with us. And I think that was very important to us. It gave us that credibility. I was the middleman stuck in front of between SMEs that like a procedure, that like a process, and a design team that don't really like a process or a procedure, they like to do their own thing. And it was looking for something that we could bring those two together. And what we started to realize was the compromise or the middle ground for that was Agile. Agile offered us that opportunity to give that flexibility. So actually what you see here is our first part to this. So my background's CI, continuous improvement, and what we started to do was map our processes. So we put together process maps to understand our process of design, and we did value stream maps, which is what you see here. This is a small part of the value stream map. It carries on along the next wall and along the next wall because it actually measures how much time we took to do each task. And it was an eye-opening, a visual opportunity, but it made us realize that actually we need to do something very different. And was Agile hopefully was going to be that opportunity. So, as I say, we're going to talk a little bit about methodology, but the outcomes we're going to focus on is this idea of responsiveness. How quickly can we work? Engagement of engaging the actual stakeholders and the different people, and visibility is how we get visibility into our process. There's some misconceptions about Agile, and I'll put my hand up. I think I was the first one to say it in our team when we talked about Agile is just not planning. You just don't bother, you're just Agile. And I think it's easy to describe Agile as all sorts of different things. Boy, was I wrong. There's more rigor and structure to Agile than we've ever done before. We are understanding what we need to build. We are putting critical path against set sprints. We are having to work out capacity that we've got in those rooms, but it gives us flexibility still in the design. So the misconception is that Agile means you don't plan. It's very different to that, but it can really, in our experience, really offer something to the business that gives you that opportunity of flex. So, how did we go about this? What was our first steps? So, step one was to learn. You know, we're an L&D team. Maybe we should go out and practice what we preach a little bit. So we did, and there's lots out there on YouTube. We got involved in learning that was within our business. So our IT&S team were a good team to go to because they were already doing Agile. Agile's fitted into IT&S, and they've developed that. So we made contacts. We got a friend, a helper within the IT&S world, Isabel, that supported us in this, that got us on board and started to talk to us about how this might work. She also mentored us a little bit when we came to our first project. But interestingly, Isabel had a CI background. And as I step back from some of the work we've done on Agile, I do see this correlation between CI and Agile. And I think it's not the tools, it's the mindset of challenging the status quo. Do we accept things the way they are? And when that is something that frustrates you, Agile is something that will sit comfortably with you. And we're now seeing in our IT&S team that they're training people on Agile and CI for their project management, and they're taking people through both those to set that mindset. So, as I say, we also had support wider in BP, so we were starting to see Agile get introduced into other parts of the organisation. So in our upstream, where we're getting oil out of the ground, they're starting to look at what Agile can support them. So in relation to convincing our management of why Agile was something we should be trying, it was easy when other parts of the business are trying to do it. And this was an eye-opener for me. I tend to be the sort of person that goes bounding in and says we should do this, and I don't leave the meeting with it signed and sealed. I haven't been successful, but organisations don't work like that, and it was bringing people with you. So we had other areas of the organisation, and we got the support from IT&S. So it was agreed that we would run a proof of concept, and in 2017 we picked a learning offer, CI for Leaders, not chosen without careful consideration here, but we picked a module around CI for Leaders that we wanted to develop. Why did we pick CI for Leaders? Again, the culture fitted, the SME was already on board, and why on earth would we push on a closed door when we've got a couple of open doors we can work with? So even the stakeholder group was CI people, so it allowed us that momentum to pick up. What I would say, and I think this was something I shared with my team, and I was quite strict with our team, is that for the proof of concept, we are going to use Agile by the book. We're not going to call it Agile and do waterfall. We're not going to change the wording in Agile to suit waterfall terminology. We're actually going to do it by the book, and that was for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because we wanted to test whether Agile was the right solution, and if we just do waterfall and call it Agile, we're not testing anything. Secondly, to actually take the people that aren't so keen and aren't so quick to move on that journey, we have to do it differently. And if we just stay back in what we've always done, we're not actually taking them on that journey. So it was really pushing people to think, actually, what is Agile and how is this going to work for us? So on here we've got some roles, and I get a little bit here into how we did Agile, but don't think Agile is vastly different to anything you're already doing now. The terminology is different, the wording's different, but some of it's around the rigor and some of it's around the mindset. So the first role, we have a Scrum Master, and the Scrum Master's role is very much to facilitate. And much like a CI facilitator, they are the expert in Agile. Not necessarily a design expert, not necessarily a subject matter expert, but how Agile works. They will guide the team and facilitate the team through that Agile process. What historically we might have called a project manager. Then we have a product owner. Well, the product owner is what we might describe as the SME. And in our world, that product owner then has ownership and responsibility for stakeholder groups and user groups. So their role is to say, okay, so we've developed this part of the project. I would need to test it with the user group and see if it works. And that's their role. Did it work perfectly? No. Funnily enough, a lot of our SMEs that get picked are the most senior people at their particular role, and consequently are the most busy people, or regularly the most busy people. So there was a bit of hand-holding in this process, and a bit of helping out that we were managing some of the smaller stakeholder groups and some of the user groups to support the SME. So it didn't work perfect, but it got us a long way down that line. And interestingly, as I'll talk a little bit later, that role of engaging the SMEs is one of the things that I think made a massive difference to the success of this project and others. So as well as project manager, we also have the design team. And I think that an important thing here is to realize that in most organizations, or in lots of organizations, that design team isn't just a team that sits in your office or dispersed across the country. It might be third party, it might be other influencers, and we worked very closely with our third parties to say how this would work. We didn't just sit down with our team, we sat down with their team, because they were going to be involved in a lot of the process that we were actually doing here. So you need that really close relationship to make sure that works, because you can't have half the team working on Agile and half the team not. So you've got to have a team with you that is willing to take on that process and that challenge, because it's as much a challenge for them as it is for us. So the actual process itself, so we carried out a scoping meeting, so effectively locked people in a room for 2 days, which in itself was actually a really positive exercise because it allowed people to focus. We shut the doors, we didn't get interference from other things, and we developed stories. And I'll go a little bit more into stories, but this is really getting the SME to think about what it is they want people to do, and the different stakeholders to think about what they want people to be able to do. So we might call these performance outcomes. We then get a list of these that form a backlog. So we might call them tasks or things we need to do. We would then do a piece of work where we would prioritize this backlog. What actually do we need to do? And this reality that we're building around a minimum viable product. I smile when I say that because as a design team, it gives us so much flexibility because we know what we're building within. We know what capacity we've got over the sprint process, and we can only build within that. The prioritizing is down to the product owner, but we can only build so much. It's not this sweet shop that everybody can keep adding to. Once we've done the prioritizing, there's a bit of critical path, because obviously if we're creating video in Sprint 6, we've got to get the scripts and the storyboards, we've got to get the questioning, etc., and we divide that up across the different sprints. And eventually we start to plan that first sprint, and we create a sprint backlog. So we know what the capacity we've got within that 2-week period, which is what we use for a sprint. I think that varies with some organizations, but we build a capacity for that 2-week period. We then do daily stand-ups. So that's 15 minutes where the designers get together and say what started, actually what is on progress, what has been completed, and probably the most important bit, what are the stoppers, what are them stopping them progressing? And we do this 10, 15 minutes every day. And again, wasn't perfect at the beginning, 10 minutes was half an hour, but as we get into this, you get the rhythm, you get the process in place, people become very au fait with this, and it drove work through the process because they knew every day they were standing up and saying what had been built. So let me now start to take you through the journey of actually what we felt we got from it. So visibility, where did visibility come into this? Well, I mentioned about the idea of the scoping workshops, and this really came down to understanding the problem and really digging deep into that. We've introduced performance consultancy to try and get that better understanding of what we mean by the problem. And this was moving away from, again, this sweet shop process where we were taking orders from SMEs of what learning offer they wanted, take it away from want and start to understand the problem they're trying to solve. And this was done by developing stories. So the stories go, as a product owner, I would like the learner to be able to, so that they can do this job safely, which is often the answer in our business. Every card, they used those phrases, and it really focused the SMEs to think about how that was going to work for them. We also thought, when I talk about visibility, we also thought about language. And one of the things we came across when we were doing this was the language we speak, the meta language that we speak within L&D, isn't necessarily the language that our SMEs speak. So when we're handing out scripts and we're handing out storyboards, actually it's not what they're used to. And we work in an area where we have lots of assurance and assessment. And what we find when we send out a script is it's more of a grammar check than it is actually the content check. So what we started to do with our third party was prototype. And actually we were building in a wireframe in the first sprint of actually what the learning offer might look like. And actually starting to build the tool as we went along. Now, I often describe this as, and the drawing on the board, my background's construction. And if you'd never built a house before and somebody puts a floor plan in front of you, trying to understand how big the rooms are or what the flow of the house is going to be is very difficult from a floor plan. Until that building's built, it's very difficult for you to see that. And actually, it's exactly the same for our SMEs. We can give a storyboard and a script because we deal with these things every day. But what we're often getting is changes through the process because an SME doesn't recognize the floor plan. So we were actually, if there were audios, we were getting one of the team to actually record the audio. It wasn't perfect, but it let the SMEs get a feel for what it was going to be like. Actually, by the time we were into Sprint 2, so that's less than 4 weeks into the project, we were actually building it in the tools to which we were working on. We also brought visibility into how we manage things as well. So we were using a product called Trello, so a basic card process where we were moving things across. There was a defined route across the process, and you could physically see the cards moving every day. We used things like wireframing, and as I say, we were building live within our product. So engagement, well, again, the workshops started to develop more of that engagement, and I think one of our key benefits from doing Agile is it felt like we were building with the SME, where I think in the past we'd built for the SME. And it was, tell us what you want, we'll take it away and build it, and then we'll come back and check with you that that's all right. So the performance consultancy part really started to understand whether it was a knowledge solution or a skills solution, motivation or environment. The stories, the as a, I would like, so that, allowed us to take that away and test it with users. If we come back to you with this learning, is this what you want to know? And I think testing this and this engagement actually allowed us to deal with the problems very quickly. So sprints, we were doing sprint reviews we do at the end of every sprint. So at the end of every 2 weeks, we were actually coming back and saying to the user groups and to the stakeholders, this is what we've built so far. This is the audio. You tell us what you think. And that was actually for us really important, and actually it changed the way things worked. So at the end of 2 weeks, we were asking SMEs, they were getting visibility of it. What were some of our challenges? Well, one of our SMEs was in Australia, one was in Alaska, one was in Brazil, one was in China, but we dealt with that. It wasn't perfect, we weren't going to get everybody in a room, so we worked remotely, but we were doing 2 meetings instead of 1, we were doing different hemispheres. But it worked, and we brought that together, so it can be done globally. We dealt with problems quickly. In this particular learning offer, CI for Leaders, at the end of sprint 1, so week 2, we started to identify from the stakeholder group that actually we were going in the wrong direction. In their views, it was the wrong context, and we changed the context of the whole learning offer. We came back and reviewed that retrospective and said, when would we have picked that up in Waterfall? Now, we don't think it would have got picked up in script and storyboard because it didn't go to a stakeholder group, it had gone to an SME. So we think we would have got to alpha, which in this particular case could have been 3 or 4 months down the line when we've built it, and the resistance to change it then is deadlines, budget, etc. So we picked that up in week 2, which we think was a massive benefit. Not only that, it engaged our stakeholders. Did they all arrive first day, first meeting? No. In fact, we debated whether we cancelled meetings because no one had said they were going to attend. When we set the meeting up, 10 people arrived, which we were chuffed. Did that grow? Absolutely. As we went on through the process, we were getting all the stakeholders globally in every meeting. If they missed a meeting, they were following that up and asking us what was actually happening, what had they missed, what did they need to contribute. So again, we were building with the SMEs, not for the SMEs, and I think that's really important. So responsiveness, it's faster. Well, actually, my argument would be if faster is your focus, you will fail. If being faster is all you're worried about, you're going to have problems. Faster is a really easy way to sell it to your management, to your leadership team, but actually, faster is a consequence, not the actual objective. So having clear planning and clear objectives and engaging your stakeholder contributes to being faster. Prioritizing what a minimum viable product is rather than what bells and whistles and everything as the final solution is helps. Prioritizing gives you flex and it helps you understand your capacity. That contributes to being faster. The stand-ups means people are driven to deliver stuff on a day-to-day basis, so that makes it quicker. Prototyping was massive to us. It actually took out rework, it took out the ambiguity for the SME, and actually that helped us being faster. And being able to test it on a regular basis with the users to make sure it was landing contributed to being faster. So does Agile affect your speed of impact? Absolutely, but it shouldn't be the main driver. So where are we moving forward? Well, 2019 is going to be an interesting year. But when I first started this, the lady I spoke to in IT&S was inspirational. And actually her comment to me, which we've got on here, is, Graham, Agile is not about speed or even iterations of improvements, really. It's about learning and improving and testing and then learning and improving and testing. It's a learning cycle. It's a learning experience for everyone. And we've gone through that cycle. and it's motivating, it's energizing, it's fun. So where are we in 2019? Yeah. So all our learning offers, he says through gritted teeth, in 2019 will be delivered using Agile, including a flagship leading in operations program. No pressure, Graham. Is it scary? Absolutely, it's scary. But what I will say is I've got an amazing team around me, an amazing team of designers who are driven, enthusiastic, dedicated to this, and that includes the BP designers and our third-party designers. What is it that's exciting them? It's exciting them that they're learning. This is something new. They're broadening their experiences. But the key part of all this, and hopefully next year I'll be able to stand here and say, we had fun. It was fun doing it, it was challenging and exciting. So, we're going to put a little bit back on you now, so I'm going to hand it back to Catherine, and she's going to give you a little bit of a task that we want your feedback, your views of how Agile is developing in your organisations and what it means to you. Okay?
Two questions in each. And what we'd like you to do is think about at your tables your experience, your inputs, your response to the questions we put, or if there's something on here that that doesn't resonate, that's okay. Come up with something else. And we'll do that for 10 minutes, depending on how much time we've got left, 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll spot around the room and get some feedback so we can all benefit from everyone's experience.
Okay, everybody. Doesn't time fly when you're all discussing stuff? So, as you can see, Kate and Graham have gone back to the front of the room. What I'm going to do now is come to some of your tables and ask one of you on the table to talk to us about the question that you decided to answer and what you came up with, so we can get some discussion going. So, I'm going to start with this table here. I did warn them. So, who have you decided is going to be? There you go.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, so my name's Vicky, and we were discussing what we've done in our organisation to create an agile learning environment and what impact that's had on us. So we were saying amongst the table in learning, we are quite heavily influenced by what a programme, so if you take something like GDPR, what an overall programme is running to. So if they're running FastPath, we're doing FastPath. If we're doing Agile, then we're jumping in from a learning perspective and doing Agile. We're not necessarily doing it consistently. We're very adaptable at the moment. So where we are using Agile really well is probably more around IT learning, so looking at systems training. But we do feel that in some instances, some programs, we're kind of using it as a bit of a buzzword amongst the table, and we're doing a FastPath program amongst 2-week sprints. So I think it's in its infancy as a group. Systems training is going really, really well. There's more to learn, I think, from what we're saying. Okay.
So, what do you both think about that, Graham, Catherine? Any feedback?
So I would say I think it's where lots of organisations are in that you use it in some places and not in others. I think one of the reasons we stuck to one proof of concept strictly to Agile was to challenge how Agile would work in developing a learning offer. So literally looking at that as the boundary. I was guilty of saying, right, we've got to look at why this is different to IT. When IT use Agile, actually, if I'm brutally honest, it's probably not that different. We just put those challenges in our own heads, really. So I would say it sounds like you're using it to some extent. I would always try and look at it, rather than saying it works for an IT solution, which is where the people will be very comfortable with it. I would maybe trial it by the book in another area to see how it works in relation to learning development and how that might, then it challenges you whether you can use it in other areas as well, would be mine.
Where am I going next?
Over here.
You see, you knew you were in trouble wearing a nice flowery shirt, weren't you? Right, over we go. Who's going to speak? I guess it's going to be you, isn't it? There you go.
It's always me. Hello. I'm just kind of, because we use a kind of hybrid, because we're a vendor, we build stuff. And quite often customers will ask if we do Agile, and I say absolutely very happy to do Agile. won't be able to tell you what it will cost really, how long it will take, or really in any accuracy what it will do. But you know, if you trust us, then we'll definitely get there. It's a bit of a hard sell. So I think Agile works really well with internal teams, but I'd be really interested if there's any like vendor companies here that are using it with your customers with any success. So sorry, that was a question for the room, really.
There is one vendor sat over there that has worked with us, if you'd like to pick up on that.
So do you want to...
So we tend to have a hybrid model as well internally. So some of the challenges are kind of working out the sprints and how much development is in those sprints, but it's about having trust and flexibility with the client team as well as backwards into the internal team. So if you've got that open trust relationship with the supplier, that's the best way forward, and vice versa. Yes. Yep.
Yeah, talk later. That's a really, really good idea. We've got a question from the floor, actually. Over to you, Madame.
Thank you. Hello. We started working agile ourselves as well, and the biggest question I have for myself and everybody else is, what about the MVP? Like, when is it good enough to try it out? Because I saw your wireframes, and I know that's only one piece, but that's not necessarily the MVP, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you decide, like, what is enough as a first deliverable without having too much risk that it's not going to bring any value?
Yeah, I think that varies. So in our situation, we had a prototype that we could put in front of stakeholders and user groups that we were testing to a level, and then we reached a release point. And I think we reached that on the end of Sprint 7. So we'd planned for 10, we released it in 7. And then what we actually did was we actually gave it a little bit of time. And what we said is any new ideas coming in at that point we'll then bring to the review point. We're at that stage now, so we're reviewing that feedback, and then we've got 2 more sprints lined up to make those tweaks and changes. What it has allowed us to do is where we've got all this, we want this, we want this, we want this, what that allows us to do is we can test that with the user group. This is what you've got now. Would this make any difference? Would this help? Would this change things? And often what we're getting back is no. But if all we'd gone by was the SME, etc., we would have probably built those elements in. So I think there's an element where you've got to release it and then test and then sprint again.
Now, I know that there was also a request for a question from this table, I believe, wasn't it? And now you're all going, no, not me. No, not you? Sure, right, okay. Anybody else? Come on, throw them out there. There's a little bit of time for questions. Thank you so much for not leaving me wandering around on my own.
Thanks so much. So you kind of talked about delivering learning offerings in an agile way. So I guess my question is around, so we build systems, internal systems, not learning offerings, but for our internal users in an agile way. And one of our challenges is how we keep up with the system training when we're constantly delivering fresh functionality every couple of weeks. And I think that's a real problem that we've struggled with. And I think just chatting on this table, it's not unique to us. So I didn't know if anyone, either yourselves or in the wider room, has any insight on ways we could kind of handle that.
I think we probably have a similar problem. We're launching a new billing system at the moment, and it's through pilot phase, and training is being built, but there's still decisions being made within the program, so there's a bit of a clash between the business and the program, but as much as possible that training is primarily digital, which, you know, it can be flexible, but there's still rework required, I think, given that potentially there will be quarterly changes to the overall system. I don't think we've got an answer for that yet, except that the learning is modular and it's blended. So there's always an element of face-to-face wraparound, and we've gone from pure face-to-face to a mix of digital and face-to-face. So trying to use those wraparounds of huddles, a bit like a stand-up, really customer-centric sessions each day to bring in different stories and use more real-time scenarios and bring those into play, and then sort of try and adapt learning as we go as well. So not a complete answer, but trying to be adaptable as we go.
Super job. Time for one more. Here we go. Thank goodness you went to the back.
I'm actually going, hopefully, on a very similar journey where we're trying to get some proof of concept stuff in to bring in proper agile with a capital A, not little a. And I was wondering, you added prototyping to storyboarding. Did you change your storyboarding and go down the visual storyboarding route instead, or do anything that was leaner on the storyboarding side?
We were literally building in the tool. We were building the story in the tool. So in the scoping meeting, we set stories that we then dropped into chapters that effectively were what in Agile talk you would call an epic. So it's different levels of detail. That was really as much storyboarding as we did. From there on in, we built in a wireframe, and two sprints in, we were actually building that wireframe and being able to move it about in the actual tool itself. Yeah, add detail. So we put placeholders in and added detail. We added video, we added audio. We were, planning to go out and record, which we did, which we knew were going to be further down the line. But we put the infrastructure in place and built it. But it just made such a difference that people could see what it was going to look like, because trying to explain that is so difficult.
Yep.
Okay.
One more. Speak now, forever hold your peace. Anyone? No, dear. Okay. If you've got one, we'll go for it.
The other thing is, how did you deal with the blending of roles? That all of a sudden someone isn't an instructional designer, but there's someone who has to do a bit of building as well, because you're in the tool from the beginning. How did you handle that? What are the tricks?
I would like to say we planned this, and it was all organised and we thought it through. But I think probably 3 years ago that changed, in that we have a relationship where we work with third party, and some we hand straight over to third party to build. We have other models where we build something completely internally, and we have a bit of a mix between the two. So the team of designers I have and the third party that we work with are actually very used to those roles changing. And I think, as I say, I'd like to say we planned that and positioned that, but it's probably more good luck than good judgment.
And we're probably quite similar, that we're definitely on a capability building journey, but our learning and development staff are having to take different roles. So they might move from design to delivery, but to project management, to focus groups. So there's a real blend, and they'll wear different hats as needs arise.
Just on one last point on that, actually. So I'll give you an example of one of my teams. So all my team are actually contractors, but I've actually had 2 of them go out and do Scrum Master training qualifications, because they wanted to move from instructional design into that role. So they've done their own self-development, and that was part of my comment about they're motivated, excited about this, because they see it as an opportunity to broaden their knowledge as well.
Well, it just remains for me to thank Catherine and Graham for talking to us this morning about Agile learning. I'm going to ask you in a minute to make an awful lot of noise by clapping very, very loudly, so everybody who's walking past to go to lunch, which I'm going to tell you about in a second, really wishes they'd been in here, okay? But I'll tell you the important bit first. Before you disappear, Catherine and Graham will be around to answer some questions if you want to. The really important thing is, if you want lunch, you need to go to exhibition area door N1. Got that? N1, and follow the grey carpet. That is what I've been told. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us this morning, Catherine and Graham.